The evening rush at Bella Vista restaurant was in full swing when Robert Chambers pushed through the heavy oak doors like he owned the place. Well, technically, he could have bought the place 10 times over without making a dent in his bank account. The 52-year-old tech entrepreneur had made his fortune in software, and he never let anyone forget it. 3 men in expensive suits followed behind him, laughing a little too hard at his jokes. They were potential business partners, and Robert was in his element showing off. His voice carried across the dining room as he complained about traffic, about his driver taking the wrong route, about everything, really. Several diners glanced up from their meals, then quickly looked back down. Nobody wanted to make eye contact with that kind of energy. The hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, led them to a corner table near the restaurant's prized possession. A gorgeous black grand piano sat there, gleaming under the soft lights. The instrument had been in the restaurant for decades, and every evening a pianist would fill the space with gentle melodies while people ate. But tonight the piano bench sat empty. The keys were silent. Robert barely noticed the piano as he settled into his chair. He was too busy checking his phone, scrolling through emails and stock prices. When the waitress approached their table, he didn't look up. Just held up one finger, making her wait while he finished typing a message. The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The waitress stood patiently, her order pad ready. Her name was Lisa Chen, and she'd learned a long time ago that some customers needed you to wait. She was 28 with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her uniform was crisp and clean. Even though she'd already worked 6 hours and had 4 more to go, this was her second job. During the day, she worked at a coffee shop, and on weekends, she picked up catering shifts when she could. Finally, Robert looked up. Not at her face, mind you. He glanced at her name tag, then immediately looked back at his menu. We'll have a bottle of the 2015 Bordeaux. The expensive one, not the cheap stuff you probably serve to regular customers. He said it with a little smirk, like he'd made a clever joke. Lisa nodded, writing it down. Excellent choice. That's our Chateau Margaux. Would you like to hear about tonight's specials? I can read, Robert interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. I'll have the lobster. Make sure it's cooked properly. Last time I was here, it was rubbery. This was actually his first time at Bella Vista, but he liked to establish dominance early. His 3 companions quickly ordered as well, stumbling over their words, clearly uncomfortable with Robert's behavior but unwilling to call him out on it. As Lisa walked away to put in their order, Robert leaned back in his chair. You've got to keep these people on their toes, he told his companions. Otherwise they get lazy. That's what's wrong with the service industry today. No motivation. One of the men, an older gentleman with gray hair, started to say something but thought better of it. He'd seen Robert like this before. There was no point in arguing. The man was brilliant in business, absolutely cutthroat when it came to negotiations, but his treatment of service workers left much to be desired. The wine arrived quickly. Robert made a show of examining the bottle, swirling the wine in his glass, sniffing it dramatically. I suppose it's acceptable, he announced, as if anyone had doubted the quality of a $700 bottle of wine. Halfway through their appetizers, Robert's attention drifted to the silent piano. He stared at it for a moment, his forehead creasing. What's the deal with that? He asked when Lisa came to check on their table. There's supposed to be music here. That's what your website says. Live piano music nightly. False advertising, isn't it? Lisa kept her professional smile in place. I apologize, sir. Our regular pianist called in sick this evening. We're doing our best to find a replacement for tomorrow night. That's not good enough, Robert said, his voice rising slightly. Other diners were starting to look over now. I brought my associates here specifically because of the ambiance. The music is part of that ambiance. Do you understand what ambiance means? Yes, sir, I understand. Again, I apologize for the inconvenience. Robert wasn't satisfied. He never was when things didn't go exactly his way. His eyes moved from Lisa to the piano and back again. A thought was forming, and anyone who knew him well would have recognized the dangerous glint in his eyes. Can you play it? He asked suddenly. Lisa blinked. I'm sorry? The piano. Can you play it? Robert leaned forward, elbows on the table. His companions had stopped eating, sensing something was about to happen. Sir, I'm a waitress. I need to attend to my other tables. That's not what I asked. Robert pulled out his wallet, making a show of it. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table between them. I'm a paying customer. An expensive paying customer. I want live piano music. And that piano is just sitting there collecting dust. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down at that bench and play something. Anything, I don't care if it's chopsticks or happy birthday. And this $100 is yours. The restaurant had gone very quiet now. Conversations at nearby tables had died down. Even the kitchen staff had paused, sensing the tension through the service window. Lisa's cheeks flushed red. Sir, I really can't. I have other customers waiting and I'm not a pianist. Perhaps we could adjust your bill to compensate for the missing music? I don't want a discount, Robert said, his voice hard now. I want what I was promised. Music. And since your establishment failed to provide a musician, you'll have to do. Consider it part of your job. Customer service and all that. The manager, a middle-aged man named Tom, hurried over. He'd been watching the situation unfold from across the room. Sir, I apologize again for the inconvenience. Perhaps I could offer you a complimentary dessert or... I don't want dessert, Robert snapped. I want music. Is that so difficult to understand? You have a piano. You have an employee. Put them together. Problem solved. Tom looked at Lisa apologetically. She could see the conflict in his eyes. Robert was exactly the kind of customer who would write scathing reviews, who would make phone calls to corporate, who would cause problems for weeks. And Tom had a mortgage to pay, kids in college. Lisa, he said softly, would you mind? Just for a few minutes? She wanted to say no. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to refuse, to walk away with her dignity intact. But she needed this job. She needed both her jobs. The medical bills from her father's cancer treatment were still crushing her, even 5 years after his death. She was barely keeping her head above water as it was. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her order pad on an empty table. The walk from where she stood to that piano bench felt like the longest journey of her life. Every eye in the restaurant was on her. Some people looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with morbid curiosity. One elderly woman in the corner sat up straighter, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused. Robert sat back in his chair, arms crossed, that smug smile still on his face. He'd won and everyone knew it. One of his companions looked distinctly uncomfortable now, but still said nothing. Lisa reached the piano. The bench was cool when she sat down. Her hands hovered over the keys, and for just a moment she closed her eyes. Memories flooded back. Memories she'd locked away years ago, too painful to revisit. A different life. A different version of herself. A girl who had dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations, before reality had intervened with hospital bills and impossible choices. She took a deep breath. The restaurant held its collective breath with her. And then, her fingers touched the keys. Lisa's fingers rested on the keys, but she didn't press down yet. The weight of everyone's stares felt like a physical thing pressing on her shoulders. She could hear Robert behind her, that satisfied tone in his voice as he said something to his companions. She couldn't make out the exact words, but she heard them laugh. That cruel kind of laugh that makes your stomach twist. She tried to remember the last time she'd sat at a piano in public. It had been years. So many years that the exact date felt fuzzy in her mind. After her father got sick, the piano had become something she couldn't afford to think about. Not just financially, though, that was certainly part of it, but emotionally, too. Every time she'd tried to play during those dark years, it felt like she was betraying him somehow. Like she was choosing music over being there for him. Her throat felt tight. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Playing piano had once been the purest joy in her life. And now here she was, being forced to perform like a circus animal for a man who saw her as nothing more than hired help. Less than that, even. Any time now? Robert called out. His voice carried that edge of impatience that probably made his employees jump in the office. We're waiting. The $100 is still on the table, but my patience isn't unlimited. A few people in the restaurant shifted uncomfortably. One couple near the window stood up and quietly asked for their check. They didn't want to witness whatever was about to happen. The manager, Tom, stood by the bar with his arms crossed, looking miserable but not intervening. What could he do anyway? Robert wasn't breaking any laws. He was just being cruel in that perfectly legal way that some people have perfected. Lisa opened her eyes and looked down at the keys. 88 of them, black and white, arranged in that familiar pattern she'd known since she was 4 years old. Her mother used to say that Lisa had taken to the piano like a duck to water. That very first lesson, she'd understood something fundamental about music that some people never grasp in a lifetime of trying. She pressed down on middle C. Just one note, clear and pure. It rang out through the restaurant, and somehow that single note made the silence afterward even heavier. Robert leaned forward in his chair, waiting for more. She could feel his expectation, his assumption that she would fumble through some children's song, that he would get his entertainment and his feeling of superiority all at once. Her right hand moved to play a simple melody. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The kind of thing every beginning piano student learns. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately hesitant. She made a mistake on purpose, hitting a wrong note that made her wince internally. Behind her, Robert snorted. "This is what I'm paying for?" he said loudly. "My 6-year-old nephew plays better than this." One of his companions, the older gray-haired man, finally spoke up. "Robert, maybe we should just—" "No," Robert cut him off. "I paid for a service. I want to see what I'm getting for my money." "Keep playing," he directed at Lisa. "Maybe try something you actually know." Lisa's jaw clenched. She could feel tears trying to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Around the restaurant, she could sense the mix of emotions. Some people felt sorry for her. Others were angry on her behalf but didn't want to get involved. A few seemed to share Robert's amusement, like this was just dinner theater. The elderly woman in the corner had set down her fork entirely. She was watching Lisa with an intensity that would have been noticeable if everyone else hadn't been so focused on the scene Robert was creating. Something about the way Lisa sat at the piano, the way her hands positioned themselves, even while playing badly on purpose. It had triggered a memory in the old woman's mind, but she couldn't quite place it yet. Lisa started another simple song. Mary had a little lamb. Her hands shook slightly, and this time it wasn't on purpose. The humiliation of the moment was sinking in deeper with each passing second. She thought about just standing up and walking away, quitting right there. But then what? She'd lose this job. The bills wouldn't stop coming. The debt collectors didn't care about your dignity. "Oh, come on," Robert groaned. "This is pathetic. Do you not know anything else? Did you fail kindergarten music class?" His companions weren't laughing anymore. Even they seemed to recognize that this had crossed a line. But Robert was on a roll now, enjoying his power over someone who couldn't fight back. It was the same thrill he probably got from hostile takeovers and crushing his business competitors. Except this time, his opponent was a waitress who just wanted to get through her shift. Tom, the manager, took a step forward finally. "Sir, I think perhaps you should let me enjoy my meal," Robert interrupted. "I'm paying customer. She agreed to play. Nobody's forcing her to stay there. If she wants to stop, she can stop." He looked directly at Lisa's back. "But then she doesn't get the $100, does she?" It was a trap and everyone knew it. If Lisa stopped, she proved she couldn't handle it. If she kept going, she continued to be humiliated. There was no winning move here. Robert had made sure of that. Lisa's hands paused on the keys. Her fingers curled into fists for just a moment. She took a deep breath and something shifted inside her. She'd spent years running from who she used to be, from the dreams she'd given up. She'd convinced herself that music was in her past, that it belonged to a version of herself that no longer existed. A girl with a full scholarship to Juilliard. A girl who'd won the youth division of an international competition at 15. A girl whose whole life had been about the piano, until the day her father's doctor said the word cancer, and everything changed. But sitting here now, being mocked and belittled, something crystallized in her mind. Robert thought he was humiliating her. He thought he was proving his superiority, showing everyone that he could make people dance for his money. What he didn't understand was that he'd just made a terrible miscalculation. Lisa's hands returned to the keys, but her posture changed. Her back straightened, her shoulders relaxed. The trembling stopped. She didn't look at Robert or anyone else. She simply closed her eyes and let her muscle memory take over. Muscle memory that had been built over thousands of hours of practice. Hours that her younger self had poured into her craft with a dedication that bordered on obsession. The first notes that came out weren't simple this time. They were complex, layered, the beginning of something that most people in that restaurant wouldn't even recognize. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. One of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical piano repertoire. The kind of piece that concert pianists spend months perfecting. The kind of piece that separates amateurs from masters. The change in sound quality was so dramatic that several conversations at nearby tables stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Wine glasses hung suspended in air. Even the kitchen staff came to the window to see what was happening. Robert's smug expression faltered. His eyebrows drew together in confusion. This wasn't right. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. The waitress who couldn't play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star properly was suddenly playing like. At her corner table, the elderly woman's eyes went wide. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's her. It's really her." Lisa's fingers flew across the keys now, moving through the difficult passages with absolute confidence. The piano sang under her touch. This wasn't just competent playing. This was artistry. This was someone who understood the instrument at a level that takes decades to achieve. Every note was exactly where it should be. Every dynamic shift was perfect. The emotion in the music filled the entire restaurant, making people forget their meals, forget their conversations, forget everything except the sound. Tom stood frozen behind the bar, his mouth slightly open. He'd hired Lisa 6 months ago. She'd needed a job desperately, had been willing to work any shift, any hours. She'd never mentioned music, never mentioned anything about her past except that she was working to pay off family medical debt. And now here she was, playing like she belonged on a stage at Carnegie Hall. Robert had gone very pale. The $100 bill sat on his table, suddenly looking cheap and insulting. His 3 companions were staring at Lisa's back, then at Robert, then back at Lisa. One of them, the gray-haired gentleman, quietly stood up from the table. He placed his napkin down carefully and walked toward the exit without a word. He wanted no part of whatever was about to come next. The music continued to build, sweeping through the restaurant's ornate dining room, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner with its power. Lisa was lost in it now, her eyes still closed, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. This was who she really was. This was what she'd given up. And for just these few minutes, playing for all the wrong reasons in front of all the wrong people, she was home again. The music poured from the piano like water breaking through a dam. Lisa's fingers moved with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. The notes cascaded over each other, creating layers of sound that filled the restaurant with something electric. This wasn't background music meant to blend into conversation. This was music that demanded attention, that grabbed you by the chest and refused to let go. People had started pulling out their phones. All around the restaurant, screens lit up as diners began recording. Some held their phones up openly, not even trying to be discreet. Others tried to be more subtle, angling their cameras while pretending to check messages. But everyone wanted to capture this moment. Whatever this was, whoever this woman was, they knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Robert sat completely still. His face had gone from pale to flushed, a deep red creeping up his neck. His mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. The smugness had evaporated entirely, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. His 2 remaining companions weren't looking at Lisa anymore. They were looking at him, and their expressions weren't friendly. The piece Lisa was playing had movements that ranged from gentle whispers to thundering crescendos. She navigated them, all with the confidence of someone who'd lived inside this music for years. Her whole body moved with the rhythm now, leaning into the forte sections, pulling back during the delicate moments. Sweat had begun to form on her forehead, not from nervousness, but from the sheer physical effort of playing at this level. Tom had come out from behind the bar and was standing in the middle of the dining room, just staring. In 15 years of managing Bella Vista, he'd heard their regular pianist play hundreds of times. The man was good, professionally trained, perfect for a restaurant setting. But this was different. This was the kind of playing you heard at concert halls, the kind that made you forget where you were. The elderly woman in the corner had tears running down her cheeks. She'd figured it out now, remembered where she'd seen this young woman before her. Well, not a woman then, a teenager, 15 years old with braces and nervous energy, standing on a stage in Moscow wearing a formal black dress that was slightly too big for her, taking first place in the youth division of one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world. The girl's name had been all over the classical music news for months afterward. Child prodigy, the next great concert pianist, scholarship offers from every major conservatory, and then nothing. The girl had disappeared from the competition circuit, from the music world entirely. The old woman remembered feeling disappointed, even a bit angry. Such talent shouldn't be wasted. She'd wondered at the time what had happened. Now, watching this young woman play in a restaurant uniform, she was beginning to understand. Life had happened. The kind of life that didn't care about talent or potential or dreams. Lisa moved into the final section of the piece. Her eyes were still closed, but her face had changed. There was something peaceful there now, mixed with the intensity of concentration. For these few minutes, she wasn't a waitress working double shifts. She wasn't drowning in medical debt or worried about making rent. She was just a musician doing what she was born to do. The last notes rang out powerful and final. Lisa's hands lifted from the keys and hovered there for a moment, as if she couldn't quite believe it was over. The restaurant was absolutely silent. Not the uncomfortable silence from before, but the kind of silence that follows something profound. The kind where people need a moment to process what they just experienced. Then someone started clapping. It was the elderly woman, standing up from her corner table, applauding with her hands held high. Within seconds, others joined in. The applause spread through the restaurant like wildfire. People weren't just clapping politely. They were on their feet, giving her a standing ovation. Some were still recording, capturing this moment of triumph. A few people were wiping their eyes. Lisa opened her eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream. She looked around at all the people standing and clapping, and for a second she seemed confused, like she'd forgotten where she was, forgotten the last 10 minutes. Then reality came crashing back. She was still at work, still in her uniform, still being stared at by dozens of people. Her face flushed again, but this time it was different. Not embarrassment exactly, but something more complex. She stood up from the piano bench quickly, her legs a bit unsteady. The applause continued. Some people were calling out bravo and incredible. Tom was clapping so hard his hands had to hurt. Robert remained seated. His two companions had stood up to join the ovation, but Robert sat there with his hands in his lap, that $100 bill still on the table in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, like he'd physically shrunk during the performance. One of his companions leaned down and whispered something in his ear. Whatever it was made Robert's jaw clench. The elderly woman was making her way across the restaurant now, moving slowly but with purpose. She had that determined look of someone on a mission. Other diners parted to let her through, still clapping, still recording. She walked right up to Lisa, who looked at her with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been recognition. "Lisa Chen," the old woman said, her voice carrying despite the noise. The applause began to die down as people strained to hear. "You probably don't remember me. My name is Patricia Whitmore. I was one of the judges at the Tchaikovsky competition. Youth division. 15 years ago in Moscow." Lisa's hand came up to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You won first place," Patricia continued, loud enough now that most of the restaurant could hear. "You played Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto. I've never forgotten it. You were 15 years old and you played like you'd lived 100 years. We all thought we were watching the beginning of an incredible career." People had stopped clapping now, sensing that something important was happening. Phones were still recording. Robert had stood up finally, but he looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "What happened?" Patricia asked gently. "You had a full scholarship to Juilliard. Multiple offers, actually. And then you just vanished from the music world. I've wondered about you over the years." "We all did." Lisa's eyes were shining with unshed tears. She glanced around at all the faces watching her, waiting for an answer. Tom stood nearby, looking completely stunned. He'd had no idea at all who he'd hired. "My father got sick," Lisa said quietly. The restaurant was so silent now that everyone could hear her. "Cancer, stage 4. The medical bills were overwhelming. My mother worked 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough. I couldn't leave for New York. I couldn't leave them to deal with it alone. Patricia nodded slowly, understanding dawning on her face. You gave it up. All of it. I gave it up, Lisa confirmed. Her voice was steady, but you could hear the weight behind it. Years of sacrifice, of putting away dreams, of choosing family over everything else. He needed treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. Clinical trials. Experimental procedures. We sold everything we could. The piano I'd grown up playing. My mother's car. It still wasn't enough. By the time he passed away 5 years later, we were buried in debt. I was buried in debt. Someone in the restaurant let out a soft gasp. A few more people wiped at their eyes. Even the waitstaff who'd gathered to watch were affected. This wasn't just a story about talent or music anymore. This was about the choices people make, the sacrifices that never make headlines. I did finish a degree online, Lisa continued. Business management. I thought maybe it would help me get a better job, work my way out of the hole. But the entry-level positions don't pay enough. So I work here. I work at a coffee shop during the day. I pick up catering gigs on weekends. I play piano sometimes, late at night when nobody can hear. But only for myself. It's been a long time since I played for anyone else. Patricia reached out and took Lisa's hands in her own. You haven't lost it, she said firmly. Whatever I just heard, that wasn't rusty or out of practice. That was mastery. That kind of ability doesn't disappear. Lisa smiled sadly. Mastery doesn't pay the bills. Maybe it could, Patricia said. She pulled a business card from her purse and pressed it into Lisa's palm. I run a foundation now. We support musicians, especially those facing financial hardship. I want to help you. If you'll let me. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath again. Lisa looked down at the card, then back up at Patricia. I don't understand, she said. I want to organize a benefit concert, Patricia explained. With you as the featured performer. We'll use it to raise money for your debt and to relaunch your career. You're too talented to spend your life carrying plates. No offense to waitressing, she added quickly, glancing at Tom, who shook his head to show none was taken. Lisa couldn't speak. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Patricia pulled her into a hug while the restaurant erupted in applause again. This time it was different, warmer. People weren't just applauding the performance anymore. They were applauding the story, the revelation, the hope of what might come next. Through it all, Robert stood at his table watching. The $100 bill looked obscene now, lying there like an insult. He reached down and picked it up slowly, his hand shaking slightly. His remaining companions were studiously avoiding eye contact with him. Around the restaurant, several people were looking his way now, and their expressions were not kind. They'd seen what he'd done, how he'd treated her, and now they knew exactly who she was and what she'd sacrificed. Robert opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say? Sorry seemed inadequate. Everything seemed inadequate. He'd tried to humiliate someone he'd assumed was beneath him, and instead he'd revealed a story that made him look like exactly what he was. Small, mean, petty. One of his companions put a hand on his shoulder. We should go, the man said quietly. Now, but Robert couldn't move yet. He stood there watching Lisa, still crying in Patricia's arms, surrounded by strangers who'd become her champions. And for the first time in a very long time, Robert felt something unfamiliar. Shame. Lisa finally pulled away from Patricia's embrace, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Her mascara had run slightly, leaving dark smudges that she didn't seem to notice or care about. Around them, people were still standing, still watching, phones still recording every moment. The whole scene had taken on a surreal quality, like everyone was part of something bigger than just a dinner service. Tom approached them carefully, still looking dazed. Lisa, he said softly, take the rest of the night off. With pay. Take tomorrow too if you need it. He glanced at Patricia. I had no idea. I'm sorry I asked you to play. I should have stood up to him. Lisa shook her head. You didn't know. Nobody knew. She looked around at all the faces watching her with sympathy and admiration. I worked really hard to make sure nobody knew. Why? Someone called out from a nearby table. It was a woman in her 40s holding her phone up to record. Why hide something like that? Lisa took a shaky breath. Because it hurt too much to remember. Every time I thought about music, about what I gave up, it felt like losing my father all over again. Like his illness had stolen two things from me, instead of one. So I just put it away, locked it up, pretended that part of my life never existed. Patricia squeezed her hand. But it did exist. It still exists. What I just heard proves that. Across the room, Robert was still frozen in place. His companion had given up trying to get him to leave and had sat back down looking exhausted. The third member of their party had already left, probably calling an Uber from the parking lot. Robert's face had gone through several shades of red and was now settling into a grayish pallor. He looked sick. One of the other diners, a young man in his 20s, stood up and walked toward Robert's table.
He had his phone in his hand, and from the angle it was clear he'd been recording everything.
"Hey," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. "You should be ashamed of yourself. That woman has more talent in her little finger than you'll ever have in your entire life. And you treated her like garbage." Robert's eyes darted to the phone, to the young man's face, then around the restaurant where dozens of other phones were pointed in various directions. Some at Lisa, yes, but many now pointed at him. His lawyer instincts kicked in. "You can't record me without my permission," he said, but his voice came out weak. "We're in a public place," the young man replied, "and everyone here just watched you humiliate a waitress for your own entertainment. You tried to make her look stupid, and instead you made yourself look like exactly the kind of person nobody wants to be." A murmur of agreement rippled through the restaurant. Robert's remaining companion put his head in his hands. This was going to be a disaster. He could already see it. In the age of social media, something like this could go viral in hours. His business association with Robert suddenly seemed like a massive liability. "I didn't know," Robert said, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "How was I supposed to know she was some kind of prodigy?" "You didn't need to know," an older woman said from her table. "You should have treated her with respect regardless. That's what decent people do." Robert's face flushed red again. "I offered to pay her," he protested, waving the $100 bill that was still clutched in his hand. "I was willing to tip her generously." "You didn't offer," someone else pointed out. "You forced her." "There's a difference." Lisa turned to look at Robert then, really look at him for the first time since she'd finished playing. He met her eyes and immediately wished he hadn't. There was no anger there, which somehow made it worse. Just a kind of tired sadness, like she'd seen this kind of behavior so many times it didn't even surprise her anymore. "You can keep your money," Lisa said quietly. The restaurant had gone silent again, everyone straining to hear. "I don't want it." "I never wanted it." Robert took a step toward her, still holding out the bill. "Please, I insist. You played beautifully. You earned it." "No," Lisa said firmly. "What I did wasn't for you. It stopped being for you the moment I actually started playing. That was for me. For the girl I used to be. For my father, who used to sit in the front row at every recital and cry every single time. You don't get to pay for that. You don't get to turn that into a transaction." Patricia smiled at that, proud. Tom looked like he might start crying himself. Several people in the restaurant nodded in agreement. Robert's hand slowly lowered, the rejected money hanging limply at his side. "I think you should leave," Tom said, his voice stronger now. "Your meal is on the house. Just go." Robert's companion stood up immediately, clearly relieved to have an exit strategy. But Robert himself seemed rooted to the spot. He looked around at all the hostile faces, at the phones still recording, at Lisa standing there in her waitress uniform with tears still drying on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," he said finally. The words came out stiff and awkward, like he wasn't used to saying them. "I didn't mean to. I thought it would be funny. You thought she was nobody," Patricia finished for him. "You thought she was just a waitress, and that meant she didn't deserve your respect or consideration. That's the real problem here. Not that you didn't know about her talent. That you didn't care about her humanity." The words hit Robert like a slap. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but nothing came out. What could he say? She was right. He'd spent years treating people in service positions as if they were furniture. Interchangeable. Beneath his notice except when he needed something from them. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Lisa said softly. She wasn't even looking at Robert anymore. She was looking down at her hands, at the calluses on her fingers from years of carrying heavy trays and washing dishes. "You're not even the first person to treat me that way. You're just the first person who pushed hard enough that I couldn't keep pretending anymore." That statement hung in the air like a weight. The other waitstaff who'd gathered to watch shifted uncomfortably. They all had their own stories, their own Roberts. People who snapped fingers instead of saying please. People who complained about everything just to show they could. People who left terrible tips and felt justified because the service wasn't perfect. One of the kitchen staff, a middle-aged man with gray in his beard, spoke up from the service window. "I've been working in restaurants for 30 years, he said, "and I've never seen someone get what they deserved quite like this." "Thank you," he said, nodding at Lisa, "for showing people that we're more than our uniforms." Lisa managed a small smile. "I shouldn't have to be a world-class pianist for people to treat me with basic decency." "No," Patricia agreed. "You shouldn't, but I'm glad they know now. I'm glad everyone knows." She looked around at all the phones recording. "This is going to be everywhere by tomorrow. The story, the performance, all of it." Lisa's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't really thought about that aspect. "Oh God," she murmured. "Don't worry," Patricia said quickly. "It's going to be good. People are going to want to help you. They're going to want to be part of your comeback story. Trust me on this." Robert finally moved, walking toward the exit with his companion close behind. As he passed Lisa's table, he paused. For a moment, it looked like he might try to apologize again, but Lisa had turned away, was talking quietly with Patricia about the benefit concert, about possibilities and logistics. She wasn't paying attention to him anymore. He wasn't used to being invisible. His whole life had been about being noticed, being important, being someone people had to pay attention to. But right now, in this moment, he was completely irrelevant. The story happening in this restaurant had moved on without him. As Robert pushed through the restaurant doors into the cool night air, he could hear the sound of applause starting up again behind him. They were celebrating Lisa, her talent, her comeback. No one was thinking about him anymore except as the villain of the story, the cautionary tale. The man who'd made a terrible mistake and revealed himself to be exactly as small as his actions suggested. His companion pulled out his phone as they walked to the parking lot. "I need to do some damage control," he muttered. "This is going to be bad for business." "Really bad." Robert didn't answer. He was thinking about that $100 bill still in his hand. He'd been so sure of himself when he pulled it out. So confident that money could buy anything, could make anyone dance to his tune. He looked at it now and felt disgusted with himself. $100. Like that was something impressive. Like that was enough to compensate for dignity. He thought about Lisa's face when she'd rejected the money. The quiet strength in her voice when she'd said it wasn't for him. He'd never been dismissed quite like that before. People always wanted his money, his approval, his attention. But she hadn't. She'd seen him clearly, understood exactly what he was, and decided he wasn't worth her time. Back inside the restaurant, Lisa was writing her phone number on Patricia's business card. Around them, other diners were approaching, wanting to shake her hand, to tell her how moved they were. Tom was already planning how to handle the media attention that would inevitably come. The other waitstaff were hugging Lisa, crying, sharing their own stories of difficult customers and moments they'd wanted to quit. And through it all, phones kept recording. Capturing everything. The tears, the hugs, the hope. By morning, the videos would have millions of views. The story would be everywhere. And Robert's role in it would be preserved forever. A permanent reminder of what happens when you forget that everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. The video hit the internet before Lisa even got home that night. Someone had uploaded it while still sitting at their table, their pasta getting cold as they typed out a caption. "Millionaire forces waitress to play piano, instantly regrets it." Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. By morning, it was at 2 million. Lisa's phone started ringing at 6 in the morning. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Patricia's business card sat on her nightstand, and she'd picked it up at least a dozen times during the night, wondering if it was real or if she'd somehow imagined the whole evening. The first call was from her mother, who was crying so hard Lisa could barely understand her. "Someone sent me a video," her mother sobbed. "Baby, I had no idea you were still playing. I thought you'd given it up completely." "I had," Lisa said quietly. "Until last night." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Your father would be so proud. You know that, right? He never wanted you to give up music for him. It broke his heart." Lisa felt tears welling up again. She'd cried more in the past 12 hours than she had in the past 5 years. "I know, Mom, but I couldn't leave you both. I couldn't. I know, sweetheart. I know." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "But maybe now you can have it back. Maybe this is your second chance. The calls kept coming. Local news stations wanting interviews, classical music blogs asking for comments, and dozens of messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Old classmates from music school, teachers who'd lost track of her, even a few musicians she'd competed against as a teenager, all reaching out to say they'd seen the video and remembered her. Patricia called around 9. "Have you seen the numbers?" she asked, excitement clear in her voice. "Numbers? The video has been viewed over 5 million times. And there's more. People have started a crowdfunding campaign for you, without even asking your permission, though I hope you don't mind. They want to help pay off your debt." Lisa sat down heavily on her couch. "What? Last I checked, they'd raised $40,000, and it's still climbing. People are inspired by your story, Lisa. They want to be part of your comeback." The benefit concert Patricia had mentioned happened faster than Lisa could have imagined. 3 weeks after that night at Bella Vista, she found herself backstage at a concert hall, wearing a borrowed dress, her hands shaking as she waited to walk onto a stage in front of 500 people. The crowdfunding campaign had raised over $200,000, enough to clear her father's medical debt and have something left over, enough to breathe for the first time in years. But Patricia insisted on the concert anyway. "This isn't just about money," she'd said. "This is about showing the world who you really are." The hall was packed, not just with classical music fans, though there were plenty of those, but also with regular people who'd seen the video and felt connected to Lisa's story. People who worked 2 jobs. People who'd given up their dreams for family. People who saw themselves in her struggle. In the back row, partially hidden behind a pillar, Robert sat alone. He'd bought the ticket under a fake name, not wanting to cause a scene. Over the past 3 weeks, his life had become complicated in ways he'd never imagined. The video had done exactly what his companion had feared. His business reputation had taken a massive hit. 2 of his biggest clients had quietly ended their contracts, citing differences in values. His email inbox was full of messages from people telling him exactly what they thought of him. He'd been recognized on the street twice, and both times people had turned away from him in disgust. His own daughter, who he barely saw because of his work schedule, had called him crying. She'd seen the video too. "Dad," she'd said, "please tell me that's not really you." He'd tried to explain, tried to justify it, but the words sounded empty even to his own ears. His daughter had hung up without saying goodbye. That might have been the worst part of all this. Worse than the lost business. Worse than the public humiliation. Knowing that his own child was ashamed of him, so he'd come tonight, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe to punish himself further. Maybe hoping for some kind of absolution he didn't deserve. Maybe just to hear her play again in a proper setting, the way it should have been the first time. The lights dimmed. Patricia walked out first, giving a brief introduction. She told Lisa's story, but she did it with grace, focusing on the resilience and sacrifice rather than dwelling on the humiliation. She mentioned a difficult situation at a restaurant, but didn't name Robert or go into details. He was grateful for that, though he knew he didn't deserve her kindness. Then Lisa walked out and the audience erupted in applause before she'd even reached the piano. People stood up cheering, some of them crying already. She looked different than she had in her waitress uniform, not just because of the elegant dress, but because she carried herself differently. Her head was high. Her shoulders were back. She looked like she belonged there. She sat at the piano and adjusted the bench, taking her time. The audience settled back into their seats, anticipation thick in the air. Then she began to play. It was Rachmaninoff, the same concerto she'd played at 15 to win that competition in Moscow. But it sounded different now. There was a depth to it that hadn't been there when she was a teenager, a weight of lived experience. Every note carried the pain of the last 15 years, the loss, the struggle, the sacrifice. But it also carried hope, the possibility of redemption, of second chances, of finding your way back to yourself. Robert found himself crying. He'd never cried at a concert before. Had never cried at much of anything, really. But sitting there in the darkness, listening to this woman he'd tried to humiliate pour her soul into music, something broke open inside him. He saw clearly, maybe for the first time, how small he'd been, how his money and success had convinced him he was important, when really he'd just been a bully in an expensive suit. The music swelled to its climax. Lisa's fingers flying across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The audience was completely still, barely breathing, caught up in the emotion of it. This wasn't just a performance. It was a declaration. A woman reclaiming the part of herself she'd thought was lost forever. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the audience exploded. The standing ovation went on for nearly 10 minutes. People were screaming, crying, throwing flowers onto the stage. Patricia had to come out and quiet everyone down so Lisa could take her bows. Backstage afterward, there was a line of people waiting to meet her. Record label executives, concert promoters, directors of prestigious music schools offering teaching positions. All the opportunities she'd given up 15 years ago were suddenly available again, but better this time. Because she'd lived more life, because she understood what really mattered. Tom from Bella Vista was there too with the entire waitstaff. They'd closed the restaurant for the night so everyone could come. "You're not coming back, are you?" he asked with a sad smile. Lisa hugged him. "I don't think I can. But thank you, Tom, for everything, even for that night. Especially for that night." Robert waited until everyone else had left. It was nearly midnight when he finally approached the dressing room door. His hand hovered over it for a long time before he knocked. Lisa opened it still in her concert dress, her face flushed with exhaustion and joy. When she saw who it was, her smile faded. "Oh, I'm sorry," Robert said quickly. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see. I just wanted to say, I needed to tell you." He stopped, struggling to find words that felt adequate. "What I did was unforgivable. I know that. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything. But I wanted you to know that what happened that night changed me. Or started to change me. I've had a lot of time to think about the kind of person I've been." Lisa studied him for a moment. "You look terrible," she said finally. He laughed, a harsh sound. "I feel terrible. I deserve to feel terrible." "Maybe," Lisa agreed. "But I'm not going to stand here and tell you you're forgiven or that everything's okay. Because it's not my job to make you feel better about what you did." Robert nodded. "I know. I'm not asking for that. I just wanted to hear you play again. The right way, the way you deserve to be heard the first time." "Thank you for coming," Lisa said. And she meant it, he could tell. Not because she'd forgiven him, but because his presence, his obvious discomfort, somehow validated that what he'd done mattered. That it had consequences. That people couldn't just act however they wanted without it meaning something. Robert left the concert hall alone, walking to his car in the empty parking lot. The $100 bill was still in his wallet. He'd kept it there as a reminder. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd donate it to Patricia's foundation. It wasn't much. It wouldn't undo what he'd done. But maybe it was a start. 6 months later, Lisa performed at Carnegie Hall. Her debut album had just been released, a mix of classical pieces and her own compositions. The critics called it a stunning return and worth the wait. She'd started teaching too, working with young musicians who showed promise but couldn't afford proper training. She thought about Robert sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of distant curiosity. She'd heard through Patricia that he'd changed how he treated people, that he'd become a major donor to the foundation, that he was trying to be better. She didn't know if it would stick or if it was just guilt-driven temporary reform. Either way, it wasn't her problem anymore, because she'd learned something important that night at Bella Vista. She'd learned that you couldn't let other people's cruelty define you, that your worth wasn't determined by how others treated you, and that sometimes the worst moments of your life could crack you open just enough to let the light back in. She was playing piano again. Really playing the way she was meant to. And for the first time since her father's diagnosis 15 years ago, she felt whole. Not because someone had given her permission or because she'd proven something to anyone, but because she'd finally given herself permission to be who she was always supposed to be. The girl who'd won competitions and the woman who'd sacrificed everything weren't separate people anymore. They were both her, all of her, and that was enough.